Explain, the show where an old timer explains old timey things to young whippersnappers, and they, in turn, explain newfangled nonsense to him. And now, here's your host, Precious D.
Hey everybody, welcome oldsters and youngsters. I'm your host, Precious D, and with me again today is my buddy Breechies. Say hello to everybody, Brianna.
Hi.
Today we're talking about Charlie Chan. Now, before I get into any old-splaining about Charlie Chan, or please forgive me, white-splaining about Charlie Chan, Brianna, I'd like to just get what were your I asked you to watch Charlie Chan in Paris. So without knowing anything about him going into that, as a 21st century Chinese American young lady,
Half Chinese. I feel like that's
half Chinese, half
Chinese.
Chinese. You're an American. You're a mixture of a couple of things, sure. But as someone who has Chinese ancestry, what were your initial impressions of the whole thing, of that movie and the character when you first watched it?
So, like I watched it and I was like, okay, this is kind of stereotypical. Like something I noted was that his English wasn't perfect, which I understand he's playing an immigrant and so probably he is playing an English as second language character, but it is a stereotype that is attributed to a lot of Chinese characters. And also he spoke like fortune cookies, which I was kind of like, okay, you're the only character that talks like this. I wonder why. And
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that they had that scene. We watched Charlie Chan in Paris, right? That's the
Yeah.
title of the movie. Okay.
Yes.
There's that scene where they have that one character who's a dick, Max, playing up like an accent and broken English when he first meets Charlie.
Yes.
And then Charlie goes on to blow him away with his very normal and eloquent speech. But for me, I was kind of like, okay, I think it's interesting that they're choosing to address this racism angle, so clearly they have some condemnation of it, but also aren't they kind of doing the same thing? was my
Yes.
thought. Like I was like, in a way they're also doing this, so it feels weird because they're specifically coming out and condemning it, but like I'm like, okay, so you got like part of the way there. You understand it's problematic. You just don't understand why what
Right.
you're doing is also problematic. You're like, no, this is the better version of this, and I'm like, okay. And so that was a little bit off-putting, but I was amazed at like the son. He spoke for the first time and I was like, oh, that is an American accent. I was like,
Yeah.
huh, interesting. And I thought that was kind of funny. There was a scene where let me see. Yeah, I have most of my notes are just like quotes of like the things that he says, like the use of words like good fortune, honorable mother, worthy offspring, those kinds of words, and must turn up many stones to find hiding place of snake. I'm like, okay. Oh, also they had this thing where they kept talking about donuts, and have you seen Knives Out?
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if I was like, is this where that came from? Because like it was a really long discussion of donuts, and all I could think about was like Knives Out, and I was like, I guess Ryan Johnson must have seen this movie, which like probably is the case, but I thought it was kind of funny. There was one bit where I was annoyed at the police chief. I have well, fuck you, sir, assuming only a jealous woman could have murdered that dancer, unlike any of the powerful men she spends a lot of time around. Um, but there was one line. So Charlie Chan comes out of, I don't remember whose house it was, someone's house, and he goes over to the car where his son is asleep and knocks on the window, and the son wakes up and starts saying something that isn't English.
Yes.
And I listened to it and I was like, okay, I recognize some of those syllables as syllables that do appear in my family is Cantonese. We do not speak Mandarin. And I was like, okay, maybe this is Mandarin, but I don't think it is. And I was like, it sounds like some syllables that are used in Cantonese, but it repeats too often in like a cyclical way that I'm like, I don't think this is actually language. I think this is just gibberish. And so
Huh.
my mother does not speak Cantonese, but she can hear it. And
Uh-huh.
so I was like, hey mom, can you like listen to this and tell me if you think it's actually words? And she sat there and she was like, I don't think so. And she said like we have to like send it to your gung to be sure, but I didn't get it to him in time, so I don't know. But she was like, like it's almost there, and I was like, yeah, I can hear some syllables that are in. She's like, yeah, it's just and I was like, it repeats weird. She's like, yes, it does. And I did go look this up, and I discovered that Ki Luke, the actor that plays the son,
Mhm.
is a Cantonese speaker,
Okay.
and from like was raised speaking Cantonese. And I was just kind of like, okay, speaks Cantonese. Why wouldn't you, as a director, just have him speak Cantonese?
Right. I assumed that that there wasn't anything in the script that I assumed that there were not specific words in the script. They just told him, "Hey, wake up and say something in Chinese like you're coming out of a dream."
Mm-hmm.
And
It
he
could still be
did.
Cantonese,
And
but
maybe
I
right. You couldn't figure
didn't
out
think
what it
it
was.
was, and my mother didn't think it was.
So
Like my
maybe he
mom was
was
like,
just
I don't think it is, but and I was like, I think it's weird. Like I'm like, why wouldn't you just say Cantonese though? Because
maybe
it would be easier for the actor to remember to do.
right. Yeah. Maybe it was just the Chinese equivalent of waking up and going, "Hey, hey, what, where, what?
Well,
What
because
happened?"
because then Charlie Chan responds like, I know you didn't kill anybody. So I'm like, okay, so clearly there was supposed to be
Oh,
like
so
content in that phrase.
right, huh?
So,
That is, yeah, that is weird.
which to
Um,
be fair, I don't think those would be like words that my mother would be have grown up commonly hearing. So maybe she just doesn't know the word
maybe
for.
right. We will get to the bottom of this mystery. So,
Mhm. It very well could be Cantonese, but I it didn't sound like it was to me, and it didn't sound like it to my mother who can understand Cantonese.
right,
But we did not actually get it to my Cantonese speaker, Gung Gung, so we don't know for sure.
okay. But it sounds like that for the most part, you know, you saw that was problematic, but you weren't horribly offended and took it in the
No, I was just kind
context
of
of the
like,
time.
okay, like this is not the worst. Honestly, the thing that bothered me the most was if that line is just gibberish. I was so like, I was like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just say
Right.
something in Cantonese? It would be so much easier.
So,
Mhm.
so this is part of what I find so interesting about Charlie Chan. Well, I should say that I grew up watching Charlie Chan. As I've said many times to the youngsters, you used to just watch whatever came on TV. You didn't
Mhm.
have a choice. And that was often what was on the Saturday or Sunday afternoon movie when I was a kid. And I always enjoyed Charlie Chan. And of course, as a little kid, I don't think I even realized he wasn't being played by a Chinese guy at first.
Yeah.
Eventually, I started noticing the names of the actors, and I watched enough of them that I was like, oh, that's a different guy
Mhm.
playing Charlie Chan. So I didn't, as a little kid, I didn't think that much of it. But as I got older, you're like, oh, that's the thing is, some people look at racism as binary. Something's either racist or not racist, and it's really more of a spectrum
Yes, I agree.
with just insensitive and ignorant on one end of the spectrum, and I want to kill everybody who's not like me on the extreme other end of the spectrum.
Mhm.
And I do think that sometimes when you point out to somebody that something's racist, they're on the insensitive end of the spectrum and they feel like they're being accused of being on
Being
the
on
kill
the kill
everybody.
everybody, yeah.
Right. So they push back and say, no, 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 that's not racist
Mhm.
when we're talking about degrees.
Right.
And I also I find it very interesting also that Charlie Chan is a very good example of something that seemed or was intended to be progressive at the time it was made, but now looks problematic.
Yeah.
Because, well, I don't want to get too ahead. Let me first, well, I wrote down Charlie Chan role model or offensive stereotype. Why not both?
Yeah, I agree. I will say I found it a touch ironic that I was like, okay, so this Swedish actor
Yeah.
has a thicker Chinese accent than
Yeah.
the actual Chinese immigrant.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is
Uh,
actually interesting and
mhm.
and accurate in a way, in that yes, Charlie Chan emigrated to Honolulu from Hong Kong, so
Yeah.
he
And his
English
son
is
is
his
playing
second
first
language.
generation, so he
Yeah.
has
So
much less significant of an accent. I just thought it was funny, like the demographics of the actors.
yeah, all of his children in all of the movies are thoroughly assimilated Chinese Americans. They are hip young teenagers who speak perfect American English and dress in current American fashions. I mean, Charlie does too. Well, a few times we see him in traditional outfits in the movies, but yeah, they're hip young teenagers who not only speak English, but they will in some of the later ones. We didn't see it as much in this one, but they'll use modern slang, American slang,
Hmm.
and which of course confuses Charlie for humorous purposes. But I, they are all always played by Chinese Americans,
Hmm.
not by people in yellowface, but Charlie himself is almost always
Played by someone in
played
yellow
played by
face.
a white dude, except when he's played by a Hispanic dude in some Spanish language films. And there were actually some Chinese made Charlie Chan movies.
Hmm.
So people will often talk about Key Luke, but he was actually played by Chinese actors in China.
Right.
But we'll get to that in a minute. Let me go back a little. It's hard to talk about Charlie Chan without first talking about Fu Manchu. Are you at all familiar with the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu?
I've heard the name before, and I knew it was associated with like a villain, and
Yes.
I've seen some people talk about it in like the context of like Yellow Peril.
Yes, exactly.
But I don't know, like, I don't know what movie he's from. I don't know what he does, anything like that. I don't know anything like that.
So Dr. Fu Manchu was created back in 1912 by an author named Sax Rohmer. And yes, definitely part of the whole Yellow Peril idea. He's basically a supervillain, a super genius. He devises all kinds of terrible death traps. He's the head of a crime organization, Sci-Fan, I think they're called. And the lead of those books is actually a kind of Sherlock Holmes type ripoff guy, Nayland Smith, he's a government agent, not a detective, but he has a doctor sidekick, Dr. Petrie, who is the one that's actually writing the books. So that's why he's kind of a Sherlock Holmes type guy.
Right.
And Fu Manchu is, at least when he was first created, is just straight up racist. They talk about him embodying the inherent deviousness of the Chinese, and as if Chinese people are have inherently these bad qualities, and Fu Manchu is just the most extreme example of that, while also being the most intelligent man on the planet. He's also the most evil. So Sax Rohmer tried to claim that he based him on actual criminals he was familiar with from London's West End, but I think he's just being a racist dick. In
I mean, he
later
very well
books,
could have been basing it on some white criminals he knew
there, there
and
you
just
go.
assigning it to.
Right. Now, in later books, it becomes more about Fu Manchu's personal evil rather than a inherent racial evil, because I think eventually Sachs himself started to realize, oh, maybe this isn't so great.
Hmm.
But the character has been very popular and has appeared in many movies and comic books and things. In fact, he was the original father of Shang-Chi in the Marvel comics. Marvel had a license for Fu Manchu at the time, but then they lost the license and had to stop referring to his father as
Fu
Fu
Manchu, so then
Manchu.
he became the Mandarin.
Yeah, well, for a while they just called him the Doctor,
Hmm.
and then I think the Mandarin may have already existed as a Fu Manchu ripoff,
Okay.
and then they just, but from a
Merged them.
different comic book. I, yeah, they just merged them into the same character, and he might have gone through a couple of other name changes. So I think the idea is now, oh, Fu Manchu was just an alias for the Mandarin. But the reason I bring him up is because Charlie Chan was a reaction against Fu Manchu.
Hmm.
Earl de Biggers, the author who created Charlie Chan and wrote about him in 6 novels, well, partly he was inspired by reading an article about Chang Apna, an actual real life Honolulu policeman somebody should make an actual movie about Chang Apna. He's amazing and incredible. He once arrested an entire bar full of people single-handedly, marched them all down the street to the police station. Just through the power of his personality, I guess. He was just like, that's it, knock it off, you're all under arrest, everybody follow me. And they freaking did it. But Earl was, offended by this stereotype and wanted to include a positive image of a Chinese character. And he was actually a kind of minor character in the first book, House Without a Key, that he appears in. But then later he moved him to the main character. And I've got some of those books. I've never read them all the way through. I have so many books I haven't read. But it does seem like in the original books, he's a little less of a stereotype. His English is not as broken, or maybe not even broken at all. And he's a little less subservient.
Yeah, I did also notice that
in the
movies.
In some of the later ones, after Sidney Toller took over for Warner Oland, he started playing him a little less subservient. But the character became very popular. 48 films with 6 different actors altogether. That's including the Chinese and the Spanish language ones. A TV show, a cartoon, another attempt at a TV show. And at one point, Lucy Liu was developing a project where she would play Charlie Chan.
I would have been down to see that. I guess it got into development hell and then disappeared, though.
Yes.
So these things Okay.
Yeah, it got caught in she was going to be playing like the granddaughter of Charlie Chan, who was also named Charlie Chan.
Yeah, she's going to be like Charlotte or something like that.
Yeah. And I would have loved to see that, especially if she wore the white suit. I would have loved that. But it was development hell, but I think there was also maybe a little pushback of like, really, Charlie Chan, you sure you want to do that? I think it's funny though, because she has a very Charlie Chan name.
Yeah, that's true.
English an English first name, Chinese last name,
and
that start with the same. It's alliterative, yes. So I think she would. I just find that funny. But the reason I asked you to watch that film in particular was because it's the first appearance of Number One's son. So I wanted you to see that element of the character, that he has these children who are Americans and are not stereotypes. And they become, we see, it's unclear how many children he has because, continuity, but we see a picture where there's just a whole line of those kids behind him, and various different ones appear in other films and TV shows. Number 2 son, Number 1 daughter. My dad calls me Number 1 son. So there you go. Because I'm the oldest.
That's sweet.
Yeah, he'll come into the kitchen and say, how's my Number 1 son doing today? So, yeah, I think although Charlie Chan is problematic, I still enjoy him, partly out of nostalgia. But I do think I think he's well-intentioned. He's problematic, but he's well-intentioned.
Throughout media criticism, especially when it relates to race, a lot of times there will be discussions about like positive portrayals, positive but still problematic portrayals of certain characters of race. And I'm just kind of like, what would have helped with this is if you had a Chinese person involved in the creation of this character. And it's like,
yeah.
And it's like, okay, like he's based on a real person. I believe he's of Chinese descent. I don't know, like Chang Apna. But like, I'm like, I assume when the character was made, there were no discussions with Chang Apna about this or anything like that. So it's based on a real Chinese person, but it's still a white person's version of a Chinese person.
Well, Chang Apna died in 1933, so I don't know if Earl ever spoke to him when he was creating the books, but he would have been around for those early movies.
I feel like I saw a picture of him with the first actor that played Charlie
Warner?
Chan.
Oh yes, there's one right here. Yeah, Warner Oland. So now Key Luke has spoken about, there are some like, hey, what's up with, how do you feel about that white guy playing your dad? And he was always very charitable about it. I mean, I think at the time he was, just the fact that there was a part for a Chinese American actor that wasn't playing either a bad guy or a servant I think he appreciated. He was just glad to get the work. But I think he felt that Warner was trying to be respectful, wasn't trying to do a caricature. And yeah, you mentioned that guy that was being racist to Charlie. That one thing about these movies is that most of the white people in them treat Charlie with respect and dignity. He's always the smartest guy in the room. Most of the white people are very respectful. In fact, they've called him for help. And if anybody is disrespectful, they turn out to be the bad guy.
That's true.
So it's presented as a dick move for the white guy to put on an accent and what did he ask him if he wanted a dlinky? Ugh, just wanted to punch the guy. So yeah, I think they're very well intentioned. It just you couldn't have found a well. The thing is I think partly it's like this circle. They want somebody who's kind of a name, who's kind of known to play the part, but because Chinese actors aren't given any good parts, none of them have that. None of them are in that position.
Right.
So they go with somebody like Warner Oland. Warner Oland, by the way, also played Fu Manchu before he played Charlie Chan. So
that's kind of amusing.
Now I do that. Warner claimed to have Mongolian ancestry, but I don't know if that's ever documented.
I assume that's a thing where like my white grandmother claimed that we had Native American ancestry. Right.
Yeah. It's hard to know if he just totally made it up or if it's just something that he was told as a kid, and there's no.
I mean, like he was gonna pick.
Now, mind you,
Mongolian was a pretty good pick.
I was gonna say because what is it, 70%? There's a good chance any one of us. Because of Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan seed.
Yes. There's a good chance I have some Mongolian ancestry because of Genghis Khan.
If you were going to pick an ancestry, an East Asian ancestry to claim you had, that's a good guess.
But I think in Warner's case, I don't think they were putting a lot of makeup on him. I think he gets these parts because he happens to kind of look sort of Chinese. I don't think they were doing like prosthetics on his eyes. Whereas the other guys, when you see them not wearing their Charlie Chan makeup, you go, "Oh yeah, that's a white guy."
Yeah, the vibe I was getting from him is that like instead of putting prosthetics, they just use like strategic eyeliner or whatever.
Probably. So okay, we mentioned Key Luke a little bit, but let's talk about him a little. I love Key Luke. He played number one son, Lee Chan, in a number of films with Warner, and then he came back and played him much later when Roland Winters was doing the part, and at that point he was actually older than Roland Winters. He went on to do the voice of Charlie Chan in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon called The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan in 1972, thus making him the only, apart from the ones made in China, the only person of Chinese descent to play Charlie Chan so far. So good for him. Did you get a chance to peek at those cartoons at all?
I just now Googled it, and now I'm taking a look at the images.
It's basically, a Scooby-Doo recycling. I don't want to say ripoff because Hanna-Barbera took the Scooby-Doo format that they created and remixed it over and over again. Well, they did it over and over again. A group of people, usually teenagers, but in this case, Charlie and his kids of various
children
ages.
Of varying ages.
Yes, but a group of people who travel around solving mysteries, often just kind of running into them by accident. There's usually an animal sidekick. There's often music involved. The people are either in a band or we just play music while they run around during the chase scene.
Is that a dog or a cat? It's
a cat dog.
It's hideous and I love
it. So I don't personally remember watching this cartoon when it was on. I was alive in 72, but I was pretty young. And it didn't get rerun as much as Scooby-Doo did. So, But I think as far as cartoons from that period go, it's just as good as any of the others. Or
Right.
just as bad as any of the others. Let's see, anything else. Oh, there was when we first brought this up, I was looking around and I discovered a TV movie I had previously been unaware of called The Return of Charlie Chan. That was meant to be a pilot for a TV show. It did not get picked up. It was made in 1971 but did not air until 1979. And at that time, they were still casting white guys as Charlie Chan. And then there was, in 1981, there was a comedy movie released called Charlie Chan and the Curse of the Dragon Queen with Peter Ustinov as Charlie Chan. And this time, the public pushed back. As I said, Charlie Chan was very popular in the past, even though he's problematic because Chinese people, even people in China, were just so happy to see a positive Chinese character and a lead, not just positive, but a lead character, that they kind of overlooked that it was a white dude. But by 1980, people were like, excuse me, sure, we all love Peter Ustinov, but why the fuck is he playing Charlie Chan? And furthermore, Lee Chan Jr. is being played by Richard Hatch from Battlestar Galactica. The first time I'm aware of, well, I guess Lee Chan Jr. is his grandson, but still, he's being played by a white guy. So one of his descendants is not being played by a Chinese American. This movie was a flop. I have 2 physical copies of it.
Why do you have 2?
Because you ever go in the library and they have movies they're getting rid of for like $1?
Sometimes.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, Charlie Chan for $1, forgetting I had already bought it a few years before for like $2 at Dollar General.
Okay, that makes much more sense. But honestly, I from my brain for a second was convinced that you purposely bought 2, and I was
No.
why would you do that?
No,
But
I
it's
just
funny.
I have so much crap that sometimes I forget that I already own a book or a movie. I mean, this only happens if I see it for $1 or $2. I'm like, oh, that's a thing I like. Let me grab it. And then I realize I've already bought it in the past. So that was, I think, the last, apart from this Lucy Liu thing that didn't take off, that was the last time there was any sort of major Charlie Chan thing. And I think partly because it was such a flop and because of the pushback, people just decided, okay, maybe it's time to be done with Charlie Chan, rather than saying, hey, why don't we get a Chinese guy to play Charlie Chan? They've just decided that we're done with Charlie Chan. So, and I think that's kind of a shame. I'd like to see a modern, even more enlightened version of Charlie Chan, because I think ultimately in the long run that Charlie Chan is a good thing, even though he's problematic.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing that happened. I know Key Luke thinks it's a good thing. So there you go. Oh, I just also discovered there's a TV one called The New Adventures of Charlie Chan. I think I must have read about this before and forgotten. That has James Hong playing Barry Chan.
Oh my gosh, James Hong.
Yeah, who is either, I saw him listed as Charlie's youngest son, but I also saw him listed as number 1 son. And apparently, this is terrible. Let me read this. So J. Carroll Naish, again, a white guy, played Charlie. And it says here on Wikipedia, James Hong, who played number 1 son, said J. Carroll Nash had Hong fired from the show after Naish engaged in a racist outburst.
Oh my.
So I'm not familiar with that guy, but this is the first I've heard of a person playing Charlie Chan who was a dick about it. So fuck that guy.
IMDb
How
says,
dare you?
James Hong played Barry Chan, so I'm guess in this story maybe number 1 son is named Barry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're on YouTube, so now I'm curious. I gotta also James Hong. Yeah, and how dare that guy be mean? Apart from being racist, how dare you be racist specifically to James Hong? Fuck you. Of course, he was. I mean, this was a long time ago. It was early in his career. He wasn't the James Hong then. He was just a James Hong. But still, it's not okay. Not at all okay. But yeah, I got to watch some of those on YouTube now just to see young James Hong playing number 1 son. So there we go. I guess, was there anything else you wanted to say about Charlie Chan or any of his children
It's just
or
a
whatnot?
little bit about like, so in terms of like, I understand why he was positively received and why like Key Luke speaks so highly of the character. Just again, so when I was growing up, I didn't see I saw very few East Asian characters in media at all.
Hmm.
Granted, I was
Right.
watching children's media, but still, like I think maybe Ash Ketchum, but he felt white because everyone else felt white.
I mean, that's how they're drawn.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
but like when I was in ballet and we did Nutcracker for the first time, all of Act Two is done by like older teenage girls. And so at the time I would have been like an elementary schooler. And I saw in Act Two that there was a dance for China, Tea from China. And as I got older, I discovered that like actually the history with the portrayal of Asian cultures, Eastern cultures in general inside of Nutcracker has a is very fraught. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And even like after I did go on to do the Tea from China dance, and I did it with my Filipina friend, and my dance teacher made us write a statement to put in the program, so that way people wouldn't accuse her of being racist. But like, it was my childhood best friend in ballet and I doing the Tea from China dance because I wanted to do it since I was a little kid, and now that I'm older, I recognize like how fraught that portrayal of East Asian cultures is. But at the time, it was like, oh my god, that's me, that one. That's my
Right.
household. Like my household is the Chinese. Oh my god! And
Yeah.
when you have no representation or you have no positive representation, any representation that is different is gonna
Hmm.
feel really refreshing, even if it's not great.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah,
Even if it's not perfect. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's a little sad. Well, not sad, just different. When you were a child, Charlie Chan would not have been on the afternoon movie anymore, probably, or
Yeah,
maybe
and
you just
I
weren't
wasn't
watching.
really I did
Maybe you
not
weren't watching that channel.
quote unquote adult media very much. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I started watching PG-13 movies until I was 15 because then my sister would have been 13 and I'll watch them together.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, at that time, the just random Saturday afternoon movie, you would have had many more channels to choose from,
Hmm.
and if you weren't watching like American movie classics, then you would just not have come across your radar at
Yeah, I would have
all.
just been on the Disney Channel.
Yeah, exactly. So there was no Disney Channel when I was a kid. You just
Hmm.
yeah, you watched what they wanted you to watch.
Yep.
But that also meant that you discovered things like Charlie Chan or whatever that you didn't know
Hmm.
that you liked until you saw it. And then so it's kind of like listening to the radio where they just rather than picking what you want to listen to on Spotify, you get exposed to different things that you might not have chosen to watch, but it turns out that you liked it.
And then you get exposed to one
Sadly,
thing that you feel mad
yeah,
about over and
yeah.
over and over again until you hate it.
Sadly, a lot of the things that I like from my youth are problematic,
Hmm.
but it's because they're old. Things like Tarzan and Conan and the works of H.P. Lovecraft,
Hmm.
they have issues. And even Fu Manchu. The Fu Manchu, even though he's straight up racist, just keeps showing up in stuff because there is something kind of cool about the character that goes beyond his racist origins.
Hmm.
And I don't exactly know how to describe what that is about Fu Manchu, what I like about Fu Manchu stories. Maybe it's just the ridiculousness of the traps involved or the chasing around the world. I don't know. But I have to acknowledge that he he's a racist stereotype.
Hmm.
And I don't know that he's ever been played by a Chinese guy. Nicolas Cage was the most recent one to play him, but not in a full blown thing. It was one of
Oh
those
my
joke
god.
trailer
Oh, okay.
it, in Grindhouse. Did you ever see Grindhouse?
No.
Well, they made these fake trailers to go with the Grindhouse movies, and one of them is like werewolf women of the SS. So it's werewolves and Nazis, but
My god.
but then there's like and Nicolas Cage as Dr. Fu Manchu. And all we really see him do is like turn around to reveal he's Nicolas Cage and then do an evil laugh, and that's about it. So there we go. I think that's gonna wrap it up for the Charlie Chan topic. Do you have a young splain for me?
So, conversely, in order to like contrast Charlie Chan,
Uh-huh.
I wanted to talk about American-born Chinese.
Okay.
So, American-born Chinese is a graphic novel by Jean Luen Yang, and it was in the past few years recently adapted into a Disney Plus miniseries.
Yeah.
So I was rewatching the miniseries a little bit, and I was like, yeah, this is fun. But my family heard about it, and Instagram like really wanted me to watch it, and I was like, Instagram, do you know that I'm Asian, or do you just think I'm in like a certain age demographic that would vibe with this? I don't know. But
Right.
uh, I saw it and I was like, what kind of title is that? Like, what is this show? I'd never heard of it at all, and so I went and I did some Googling, and I found out it was a graphic novel, and I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And my family was talking about watching it, so we were like, all right, well, let's. And I was like, well, I'm going to check out the graphic novel from the library, and I'm going to read it. And I did, and I really enjoyed it. Granted, it is told from the perspective of a teenage boy, so some of the women, but it is what it is. Uh, and I really responded though, like to some of the storytelling about relationship with race. So
Mm-hmm.
I am half Chinese, half white, kind of covered that. But I am also specifically white passing. So when people look at me, they don't assume that I'm Asian. In fact, most people react kind of with shock and surprise that I'm Asian. Just because, and I have non-white features, like I have dark hair and brown eyes and stuff like that. But because of the area that we're in, most people just assume I'm like Latina because that's the majority
Yes.
non-white race here.
Yeah.
I
I
am
have
not.
a I have a I have a Filipino friend
Mhm.
who people assume she's Mexican. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They.
And but so like and also like my last name is my father's last name, so
Sure.
it's not my mother's very Chinese sounding maiden name. So most people don't know or assume until
Right.
I tell them. And so my experience with racism is going to be different because I like and my sister also has a white last name, but she looks more Asian than I do, and based on some of the stories she's told me, I think she's faced a little bit more overt stuff than I have.
Uh huh.
But like for most of my life, I was very impressionable at an impressionable age in like around 2016 in the big anti-SJW era. So I was deathly afraid of calling things racist.
Uh,
Because like I was like, oh, if it makes me feel uncomfortable, it's because I'm being too sensitive and not because the thing that is happening is actually wrong and I'm right to
uh,
be upset by it. Um,
oh.
and so I went through most of my life where sometimes things would happen and I would be like, okay, that was kind of racist, but I don't think it was like maliciously intentioned or like, oh, it's just like a funny coincidence. Like one time I had a girl come up to me in a theater class and we were doing like world cultures or something like that, theater around the world, and her group had Japanese theater. And she came up to me and granted, I was at top of my class sort of thing, so I had a reputation for being smart, quote unquote. But she came over to me and she was like, "Hey, how do you pronounce these words?" And I was like, "I don't know." I was like, "I don't know. You should ask someone that." And I unironically said this. I was like, "You should ask someone that watches like subbed anime." Well, because they would be more familiar with like the
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
things are pronounced and stuff like that. And I was
Right.
like, "Okay, yeah,
Right.
whatever." And I just assumed for a bit that she came over to talk to me because I was the smart kid. And I later sat back and I went, "Wait." And for most of my life, I kind of just dismissed that as like, "Oh yeah, she came up to me because I was smart." But also now I'm kind of like, did she though, or did she come up to
Yeah.
me because I was Asian and I wasn't? I still don't
Yes.
know. I'll never know, right? But it wasn't until I was in college and something happened to me that was so blatantly racist that I was like, oh my God. And it was just this guy saying some dumbass shit. Like he came over and he tried to impress me by reciting a Bruce Lee quote. And then he said something
Oh my
like,
God.
well, Asian and Jewish families, they're always really hard on their children. I was like, what the hell is happening? And so it was so
Oof.
blatantly racist that I couldn't like dismiss it as anything else. And I was like,
Right.
man, how dare you break my 20-year streak of never experiencing racism? What the hell is wrong with you? And then I sat back, and this was in 2021. so you know what was happening in 2021,
Wow.
right? Um,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
sat back and I went, oh wait, no. Oh no. Oh, that was racist too. Oh, and that was racist. Oh, wait. Oh, I have experienced racism before many times. Oh no. So I didn't get to like,
So you had to deal with it all at once?
yeah, kind of. I didn't
That's
really get to interact with my relationship to my race until I was in much older, like in the past
it
couple of
just all
years.
hit it all hit you in the face at one moment.
Yeah.
20 years worth of
And
racism.
I even had a friend, this was like in
Jesus.
2021, right? So the Kung flu was going around, and
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
a friend that like asked me, it was during like 2021, and I think 2021 was when we were especially seeing a prevalence of anti-Asian violence in
Yeah,
media
yeah.
and stuff like that being reported on the news. And she asked me, like, are you okay? And I was like, oh, I should be worried about that? And then I was like, I'm not though. And then I had a moment where I was like, oh wait, but because a lot of the people that were shown being attacked in the news were elderly Asian people, and I was like,
Yeah.
is my
Yeah,
gung gung
easy
okay?
targets fucking count.
Is
Oh
my gung
wow.
gung okay? And I was like, I
Uh,
think he's fine, but now I have to worry about if he isn't. And
yeah.
it was just you know, basically I didn't have like a very intimate relationship with my idea of myself as an Asian person. Um,
Hmm.
and when I was in my mid 20s, you know, like I was reading. So basically, I didn't get to engage with that until much later in life, like after I was 20. And I read American Born Chinese like within a few years of that incident in college happening. And so I was still like really processing and breaking it down. And I read that book and I read it thinking like, okay, I'm gonna watch this Disney Plus series. And I read it and I did cry. And I was like, no way is Disney gonna adapt this 100% faithfully.
Right.
So American Born Chinese, the book, is divided into three sections. There's a section that is telling the story of the Monkey King,
Yep.
and then there's a section that is telling the story of this teenager named Jin Wang, and then there's another section that is framed kind of like sitcom like there's a lot of times where ha 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 goes across the screen as if it's like a laugh track,
Yeah.
and it's about
Right.
this white teenager named Danny whose Chinese cousin is coming to visit. And as you read it, eventually at a certain point, spoilers, the three plots like converge together. And we see Jin, who's an Asian teenager, like face a lot of racism, where like he talks about feeling kind of out of place, or like for having strange foods, or not wanting to interact with other Asian people because he felt like it would damage his reputation. And while I haven't had anything so overt like that, I have heard my mother talk about like she was like, "Oh yeah, you know, people used to her last name is Chow. People used to make fun of us like, oh, you know, Purina Cat Chow or Ching Chong Chow or something like that." And
Oh.
I was like, "Oh my God."
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a
Wow.
thing where I was doing a different project for school and I hadn't ever really heard her talk about that, and I went, wait, what? Like, uh, so I was like, I wonder, you know, if this was how my mother felt. And then also, like, sometimes just kind of the general isolated feeling of being of a minority race. And it especially, like, for, again, since I'm white passing, my experience is different. But also, there's a unique experience to mine where it's like, I'm not Asian enough to be Asian, I'm not white enough to be white, sort of thing. Um,
Hmm.
but just that it was interesting to me. But anyways, I'm sorry, I'm really getting tangenty.
It's okay. It's
And
okay.
the Monkey King is going on, is experiencing his journey where he gets mocked a lot for being a monkey, and then he tries to change himself. He tries to force himself to assimilate, to be more human and less monkey-like. And there's a lot of things where he like tries to assert himself as something other than a monkey, and then other people repeatedly call him a monkey anyways. And I had some qualms about that because I was kind of like, well, you know, like you should respect the thing that he asserts himself as, but also the ending moral chooses to go a different direction. Then we have Jin, who's experiencing racism and stuff like that, and he's not necessarily the happiest with the fact that he is a Chinese teenager in a majority white school. And then we have Danny, who is the white teenager, whose cousin
Yeah.
comes to visit, and his cousin's name is Chin Ki. And his cousin is the most horrific Chinese stereotype you've ever seen in your life. He's specifically colored more yellow in his skin tone. He has buck
Hmm.
teeth. He speaks in English. He speaks
Glasses.
where he no glasses. He's got squinty
Oh,
eyes.
he doesn't. Oh, I thought he. I did read it. I did read it,
Hmm.
and I guess I was just assuming they gave him the giant glass. It was a few months ago, so
Hmm. Yeah.
I forgot. I thought he
They
had
give
the
him
big
the
glasses
they give him
because
squinty
gave him the
eyes.
right.
Yeah. Like you never see his pupils because his
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And he speaks where he switches his L's and his R's, and
Yeah.
he also makes use of like some of the silly uh stupid playground rhymes that children would say, like me Chinese,
Oh
me play joke,
yes.
me go pee
Yep.
pee in your coke or something like that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I remember reading Danny's section, and I also went to look at some reviews afterwards to see how other people responded to it because I responded so strongly. And I saw one person that was very, very, very upset about the portrayal of Chinky, but also I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure their profile picture, I mean, like, I can't know this, but their profile picture did not appear to be an Asian person. And
Right.
for me, when I read Chinky, I was horrified, but also I was very aware that I was like, this is the author's expression of his frustration in relationship to stereotypes. And also it's like
Hmm.
it's Chinky is particularly portrayed as like this thing that follows this teen that follows Danny, his white appearing, like he has a Chinese cousin. So I was like, oh, I wonder if he's like me, like he's white passing, but he's like blonde and blue eyed or whatever. And he follows this assumedly white passing Chinese teenager around and causes him havoc. And I was like, this is what it is. This is like the burden of a racial stereotype that follows you around no matter what, and you can't shake it because and I see Danny respond to certain things where it's like a white character says after Chinky does the Coke rhyme thing where he actually does piss in someone's Coke. A white character says to Danny, like, "Hey, I owe you a Coke," and Danny reacts very, very strongly and negatively. He's like, "Why? So I can pee in it?" And I was like, oh, so again, it's a thing where it's like it just follows you everywhere. And even when people are well-meaning, like it's so present sometimes that like all you can see is the negative stereotype. And I was like, that's really
Hmm.
sad. But also I'm sad now, and also I'm sad now too because like a little bit I can relate because even though like I'm aware that I am or at least for most of my life I was a very smart, very demure, very polite half Chinese kid. And I sometimes think about that and I'm like, man, I'm playing into the stereotype. And it's like, it's not a negative stereotype to be smart. But I have seen the way that that stereotype has been used to be harmful. Like, I had a Filipino friend in my Algebra 2 class that I helped with his math homework sometimes. And my math teacher said out loud in class, aren't Asians supposed to be smart when he asked her for help?
Oof.
And
Yeah.
and I was just kind of like, oh my god, oh my god. So even the positive stereotypes are like still harmful, but also the idea. I was like, do I play into certain roles where like a lot of times I was like, I want to be the main character because everyone wants to be the main character, like right. But I always was like, I'm never going to be the main character. I'm a side character, and I wonder how much of that was kind of a subconscious reaction to the way media portrayed Asian characters, the media that I consumed, because like usually Asian characters were the smart, either stony or demure side character, and I was that for my friends. I was the smart, stony side character, and I just it was just a thing where I was like, even when I'm doing well in school or something like that, and if I make the joke like, oh, it's because I'm Asian, right? If there's always that looming presence of like, if I make this joke, is someone else gonna say something really shitty? Like I'm trying to be lighthearted about it, but are you gonna say something really shitty? And also like, am I just feeding your shitty ideas that secretly you have that I don't know? I don't know. But the thing that made me cry the most, and also made me 100% certain that Disney was not doing an faithful adaptation. I mean, Chinky, who eats cats and speaks in broken language and fetishizes American women, I was like, no way Disney is gonna like faithfully adapt Chinky. I know, I was like, I don't know what Disney's gonna do about Chinky, but I was like, there's no way he's gonna be portrayed exactly like this. maybe they'll still do some kind of stereotyping with him, but we'll see. And the big twist is that like 2/3 of the way into the book, it's revealed that Jin is Danny after he gets a wish granted. Jin kind of like wishes to change into something else, and he is turned into a white boy. And I was like, oh my god, that's so sad. That was I cried. I was like, that's so heartbreaking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I was like, I don't know if I can necessarily relate to it 100%, but I definitely can understand the idea of like, I wish I wasn't the type of person that has to deal with these kinds of problems. And well, if you want to be the type of person that doesn't have to deal with the problems of being an Asian person, well,
Yeah.
you want to be white. And
Yeah.
I cried. I was sad for him. But I saw that and I
Yeah.
was like, Disney is not doing that. There's no way. And so I was like, I'm really interested to see how Disney chooses to adapt it. Yeah, but like I just had a really personal reaction, and when I
So
watched the Disney show, I thought it was interesting how they handled certain things. Like Chinky is not present, but they do have an in-universe sitcom that gets turned into a meme format, and Ki Hui Kwan is in this show. Ki Hui Kwan plays the Chinky equivalent in this story,
okay.
and he's a character in a sitcom, and basically it's a thing where it's like he has a line where he says, "What could go wrong?" Uh, and then usually something like falls on his head or whatever. He's like a physical comedy relief character.
Oh,
And
that's his
so basically,
catchphrase.
yeah, the clip of
Okay.
what could go wrong and then something hitting him in the head becomes a meme
Right.
in the universe
Sure.
of the story. And eventually it gets used against Jin, the main character. And I was like, this is a really interesting way to adapt this. And then later on in the series, you get a reaction from the actor that plays this character. And his story really kind of resembles Kiwi Kwan's own journey in
Mm-hmm.
acting, where he talks about how like he is disappointed in the type of roles that he had available to him, and he is not happy with that role that he had to play, and he doesn't want to do it again. And for anyone that doesn't know, Kiwi Kwan was in I watched the Indiana Jones movie, but I don't know what it's called. Uh,
Temple of Doom.
yes, and he plays the child Short Round, I believe is his name.
Short round. Yep.
And he was also in The Goonies, and he played Data.
I
And
can't remember which way they pronounce it.
and he was in a few other things, but then he kind of just disappeared. And so he was a child
Encino
actor
Man.
that just kind of disappeared. What?
He was in Encino Man with fellow Academy Award winner Brendan Fraser.
He did it bad, right?
They did Brendan
He's
Fraser.
just best. Brendan Fraser.
Brendan Fraser, he won. They were both in Encino Man, which is just a dumb comedy, and then they both won Academy Awards the same year.
Okay.
Brendan for Best Actor, and he won for Best Supporting Actor.
Okay. Just
So
because
it's
like
just a-
I've
it's
heard
just a
so
fun
many
coincidence.
names that I hear in Hollywood that I'm like, is that one of the ones
No,
that I heard
he's-
did it bad?
No, nothing.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with Brendan Fraser. He's,
All right.
as
Sorry.
far as I know,
My
he's
bad,
excellent.
Brendan
No,
Fraser.
it's
Um,
okay. No, it's just an interesting coincidence that
Mm-hmm.
years later they both won an award the same year.
Yeah. But Kiwi Kwan was like a really prominent child actor. Like he had those two big hits,
Yeah.
and then he just kind of didn't do very much after that until
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once was kind of like the reignition of his acting career. And it was because he was unhappy with the type of roles that he was being given as an Asian man.
Yeah.
And he was so excited to do Everything Everywhere All at Once because he was being shown as an Asian man with depth and the character he plays in Everything Everywhere All at Once is really like the emotional core of that movie, and he's my favorite character in that movie, and he's precious and I love him. And it's just, and he was so excited to come back to this kind of role, and he cried at the Oscars and I cried for him. And it was just really nice, and so it was interesting to see that reflected in Disney's choice to adapt this thing from the graphic novel, which I don't know what the target demographic for the graphic novel is, but it feels like it's more adults than it's definitely not kids. It might be teenagers, but I think it's for adults.
I did read the graphic novel when you
Hmm.
first brought this up. I had not had a chance to watch the Disney show, although I do love the people in it. So I've been meaning to. But I think it was really just an expression of his personal experience,
Hmm.
and the target is anybody who wants to listen.
Yeah.
I did, because it's not, it's a niche graphic novel. It's
Hmm.
not a superhero thing. It's not a blockbuster. It's a personal story.
Yeah, it's something of a memoir.
Yeah, yeah, and it is complicated and complex, and there's a lot of symbolism going on that if you're just reading it on the surface level, you're like, what the hell's going on here? But as far as the reading level, yeah, teenagers,
Hmm.
little bit younger. It's not like it's got a
Yeah.
you know challenging vocabulary. It's
It's not
certainly,
hard to read. I just wonder, like, sometimes the
yeah,
content of some of the jokes are like sexual in nature, and so I would
yeah,
assume
yeah.
people would like
So
bump it up in age range for that.
yeah. Probably junior high to high school and up. But I'm sure it has an appeal to adults who. I mean, I enjoyed it as
Hmm.
an as a old man, but especially anyone who has the same cultural experience or similar would be interested to read it. I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple of things.
Okay.
Do kids, when you were a kid, they still did that me Chinese, me play joke?
Um,
When I was a kid, that was definitely a thing, and I may have done it myself. I'm embarrassed to say, but
I
I was a
don't
child. What the fuck did
remember
I
it
know?
exactly, but like I do remember when I read that in the graphic novel, I was like, this sounds familiar. I feel like I've
It
heard
sounded
this before.
familiar.
And I wouldn't be
Okay.
surprised if it was because I had heard it in elementary school. But there are a couple of other things. Like my sister, when she told her classmates she was Asian at the time, there was a video that was going around, which like I know some people have different takes like this, but I feel like sometimes it's more acceptable for a person of that race to make a racially charged joke about their own race than it is for someone of
Sure.
another race to make, yeah, that sort of thing. Um, and if an Asian person made this joke, it would have been amusing. Basically, it was, but I don't believe at least the version that she was shown, and she was being shown it by white people.
Uh,
uh, was made by an Asian person. But basically, the joke is this is how Chinese parents name their kids, or Asian parents name their kids, and they took a couple of pans and they threw them down the stairs.
wow.
And I'm like, okay, so if an Asian person made that joke, like maybe I'd be a little amused, but also even then, it's like the fact that my sister's white classmates chose to show it to her
Uh,
specifically is like
yeah.
really. So there were still things going around, and I do remember also like at one point I was spending Christmas with um, one side of my dad's family. My dad's parents divorced, so like we have two sides that we go, and they were gonna do like a gift exchange. It's like a white elephant gift exchange, except the gifts were like good, so you couldn't really call it a white elephant gift exchange. And they called it Chinese Christmas, and I was like, why is it? My mom and I were both like, why is it called that?
Ugh.
And I think it's similar to like I think I've heard a similar thing about like a Chinese traffic stop or something like that, where basically, and I guess it has something to do with like passing around because the traffic stop thing I've heard is like where everyone gets out of the car at a red light and they change seats.
I
And I'm
yes, I've heard that described as a Chinese fire drill.
Oh, okay, that's it. That's the correct thing. Yeah. But so I'm like,
Yeah,
I guess
yeah. But I don't know why. I don't
something
know
about
why.
the rotation, I guess, is
Yeah.
associated with Chinese. I have no idea why, but I was like, why is it called that? And so I just kind of I'm wary of that sort of stuff, but I know it was still going around, and there was
Mhm.
also I was a junior in high school, and we were doing charades as a U.S. history review. And what did people do for Vietnam? Myself included. Here's the thing. If you
I
won
don't care to guess.
if you won the charades game, you got extra credit. So I was willing to sell my soul. And a bunch of classmates had gone up before me and done it, where in order to convey an East Asian culture, I think whatever time period we were reviewing was mostly talking about Vietnam, the Vietnam War and stuff like that. They went up and they did the thing where they pulled the corners of their eyes up, the slant up
Okay.
thing. And
But
teacher didn't stop it. Teacher didn't say anything about
wow.
it, and they got the points. And so then I went up there and I had the thing that was also about Vietnam. And I was like, I don't want to do this, but I want to win this game. And I know my classmates will know what I'm conveying if I do it.
Right.
And so I did it. I did the slant eye thing, and I felt really uncomfortable about it, and I still got the grade, but I still did it. And I also like I felt uncomfortable about it, and I was like, well, I did just do like a racially charged thing, and people in my classes just did a racially charged thing. But like no one reacted, so it was fine, I guess. And I was like, who was allowed to have the biggest reaction in that room, Brianna? You were allowed to have an upset reaction about that.
Now, I just have a technical question. Was Vietnam the only Asian option? How did they know this indicated
I think we were
Vietnam and
talking
not?
about like the Vietnam War specifically. So
Okay,
it was a thing where it's like, if it's or we were talking about that era of US history. So,
I see.
if we're
Okay.
talking about like Nixon and stuff like that, and suddenly someone goes up and
Uh-huh.
does the slant eye thing, and it's like, okay, it's an East Asian
Well, but
culture at this time period. I wonder which one it could be. Like,
mm, but famously Nixon did go to China, so there's
yeah,
that.
but we don't talk about that in US history. This is US history, okay?
We just talked about that one war we lost.
Just a little bit, not a lot. We talk
Now
about
I
that one war
did
that we won and lost.
okay. To get back to the comic briefly, the whole thing with Danny
Mm-hmm.
being white and his cousin, I took that very much to be like symbolic of how Danny felt. I mean, yes, it's a comic book and he literally makes a wish,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it was partly like he inside he sees himself as an American, and when his Chinese cousin shows up, he finds everything that his cousin does embarrassing. At first I was just kind of confused, but then later, as I'm reading more, I took it to mean that, oh, the character is not literally doing these hugely racist stereotypical things, and the character doesn't actually look like that. That's just how Danny feels about it. He's just hyper aware of every little thing his cousin does that doesn't quite fit in, and feels very embarrassed about it all.
Mm-hmm.
But to everybody else looking from the outside, it probably doesn't seem like such a big deal to them. So I took this all as kind of Danny's internal interpretation of what's going on, and not and how he felt about what was going on, but not literally what was going on. Like if we from the outside looked at his cousin, he doesn't really have huge buck teeth,
Right.
and
And
isn't really more yellow than everybody else.
yeah, and
So
I think they're like, yeah, it's definitely like symbolic. In the comic, it's treated as more literal, but also you're looking through Danny's lens, so everything is
yeah,
more embarrassing. But also in the comics, treated
yes,
more literal because at the end, spoilers, it's revealed that Chin-Ki is actually the Monkey King in disguise, coming to teach Jin a lesson. But
yes,
uh, I will say, like, one thing to counter though is that idea of like, oh, Jin/Danny sees himself as an American, and so all of this like Chinese thing that he's embarrassed about, he kind of is trying to assert himself as being distinct from it. Um,
right,
that was something that I was kind of like I had qualms about. Like, so at the end, one of the morals that the Monkey King says to Jin is, uh, I would have saved myself 500 years of imprisonment if I had just realized how good it is to be a monkey. And I remember thinking that, and I was like, well, I was upset by the portrayal of like the way the King was treated, like where people dismiss him for being a monkey. And I was like, well, uh, shouldn't he be allowed to be more than a monkey? And then I realized, oh, but the real message that the story is trying to convey is like, there is no shame in being a monkey,
yeah,
even if people treat you like shit for it.
right,
That's not the thing that you should be ashamed of, and you shouldn't try to gain those people's
yeah.
respect
They're
by
not they're
suppressing
not
that
really
part of
talking about
yourself.
monkeys.
Yeah, it's just and I was like, okay. At first I remember having a bit of a problem with that line. I was like, but shouldn't you be allowed to be more than a monkey? And then my answer was, or then I realized like the truth is like, well, why do you need to be more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there's this sort of thin line between trying to improve yourself or trying to be better than you are and trying to be different than you are.
Right. Yeah.
It's the difference between being the best you that you can be and being somebody who's not you.
Yeah. And it's also a thing where it's like it's about assimilation, right? It's a thing where
Yes.
it's like,
Yes.
if you're genuinely not interested in like if you're a Chinese person and it's like, yeah, I don't really eat Chinese food because I like American food more. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if it's
Yeah.
instead, oh, I don't eat Chinese food because I don't want people to think XYZ about me.
Right.
I eat
Yeah.
American food so I appear quote unquote normal. That's
Right.
the thing that the story is cautioning against.
Yes. Yes. I wanted to just briefly touch on my own sort of experience with racism, which is very different.
Mm-hmm.
If people don't know, I guess you'd say mixed. It depends on whether Mexican is a race or not.
Yeah, it's an
Hispanic
ethnicity, I think, on the
yeah,
forms
it's an
in our
ethnicity.
state.
Right. Exactly. But my father is Mexican American. My mother is white. You know, combination of numerous European
Pale
countries.
European
English.
peoples.
Yes, English, Irish, Scots, and German, I believe. So I have a Hispanic last name, but I appear very white. So I didn't exactly have racism directed at me, but I had the great pleasure of hearing how people talk when they don't think there's a minority in the room.
Yeah.
So that was my particular experience of being the guy that goes, "Hey, that's not funny.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That joke was racist." Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were Mexican. That's not.
That doesn't. You should
Yeah,
have,
that's
you
the
shouldn't have said
problem, not
joke
the
in
excuse.
the first place. You shouldn't
Exactly.
have said the joke just because I'm Mexican. You just shouldn't have said the joke at all.
Exactly. Like, there was a lot of that when I was like a teenager
Yeah.
and maybe junior high. It's not so much now. I don't think that necessarily means things have gotten better now. I think maybe
people
just
have gotten more cautious with their
I think
language.
I'm partly hanging out with older people who've learned to keep their damn mouth shut,
Mhm.
even if they feel that way on the inside, because rather than hang out with teenagers who don't know shit about shit.
Mhm.
So, but I think things in general are getting better. They're not fixed yet. We didn't fix racism just because we had a black president. It's not over.
And we have
but it
certainly done a little bit of backsliding in the past few
Yes,
years.
there's always some pushback. Whenever there's progress, there's some pushback. Oh, I wanted to mention Aquafina, though, when you were talking about roles that are available.
Mhm.
I noticed with her specifically, but maybe it's happening with other people. She's getting roles in movies that aren't Asian roles.
Yes.
You know, they aren't written for. She just happens to be Asian.
Right.
But she was in Renfield playing a police officer who
Yes.
could have been anybody.
I did see that movie.
Could have been anybody. And I just watched Jackpot with her and John Cena.
That one I haven't seen.
It just came out
Mhm.
like on Thursday. It's on Amazon Prime. And Simu Liu is also in it.
Yay, Simu Liu! I love him.
There
I love
is
him and
a but
Barbie
it
so
seemed
much.
yeah. Well, and of course they were in Shang-Chi
Mhm.
together. But there's nothing inherent to her character that is Asian.
Mhm.
It's just her. There is a point in the movie when she meets Simu Liu where he's talking about us being a couple of strong Asian, positive, whatever, you know, because he's being an insincere douchebag.
Right.
But that was probably added, probably added
Because
later once they
Awkwafina
were
was
cast.
Yeah.
Exactly. And because he was
Because
probably, he was cast because she was cast probably, because she's probably a producer. Anyway, it's just, that really had nothing to do with the plot. It just happened to be who they were.
Mhm.
And I'd like to see more of that on a similar thing. Peter Dinklage is getting cast in a lot of roles that
Yes.
aren't written for little people. We're just casting him because we like him. So if Hollywood is listening to this podcast,
Which I doubt.
do
but,
more,
you know.
do more of that.
Yeah.
Do more of that.
And
Just cast people that are good. No, don't sweat it so much.
I know a lot of people Aquafina rubs the wrong way, and also like she
Yeah.
was in like the Little Mermaid movie and stuff like that, and I'm like, I like that, we have more Asian representation, but also, even like regardless of how you may feel about Aquafina, you should also hire other people.
Yes.
Let other
Yes. You
people
don't have to
also do
hire.
this.
Yes. You don't. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't have to just hire Aquafina.
Yeah, you don't have to have
You can. You
Aquafina
can.
cannot be your one Asian woman. Get
You
some more in
can.
there.
You can hire. Yeah. You can do more of that. Good job hiring her, but hire some other people too.
I will say one thing that like I think is really significant about our progress in terms of representation for East Asians on screen. Um, like so we went from Charlie Chan, who is played by a white person playing an Asian person. And then we got to a phase where we had a lot more East Asians playing East Asian characters, but frequently they were interchangeable. I think that's still kind of around where it's a thing of
Yes.
Fresh
Yeah.
Off the Boat has Randall Park in it, and Randall Park is of Korean descent, and he was playing a Taiwanese man, and
Well, Simu Liu is in Kim's Convenience. He's
he's
Chinese and
Chinese, and
they're
yeah,
Korean.
Korean. Yeah, it's a thing where it's like they're still interchangeable, but American-born Chinese, all of the Chinese characters are almost entirely played, if not entirely played, by people of Chinese descent, and I think that's really cool.
Well, I do. I get that,
Mhm.
but I had a friend back when Star Trek Voyager was on,
Mhm.
a Korean friend
Mhm.
who was very annoyed that Harry Kim, a Korean character, was being played by a Chinese American actor.
Yeah, I think
And
it's annoying.
I get that. I understand. When I was a kid, people were annoyed that Freddie Prinze, a Puerto Rican actor, was playing a Mexican character on Chico and the Man. But I pointed out to him that he didn't, and it's not quite the same, but I pointed out to him that he didn't seem to have any problem with Patrick Stewart playing Jean-Luc Picard on Star Trek The Next Generation.
I think
So,
part of it is because there are so few Asian characters
yes.
comparatively, and it's like, yeah, it's a thing where it's just kind of like a proportion thing, right? So it's like,
Yes.
if I have 30 Asian roles and 15 of them are played by the wrong kind of Asian, for lack of a better term, versus
Yeah.
I have 500 white roles and
Right.
50 of them are played by the wrong kind of white, then, like, it's a thing where it's kind of like,
Yeah.
it's less of a problem, but also I will say, because of the way that white is defined as a race, you're gonna get a lot more mixed ethnicities in there. So there's also that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a difference between race and nationality are not quite the same thing.
Right. And ethnicity, I don't know all the nuances between the differences of the terms, but I know there are differences.
Yeah. So, and I didn't push him back hard on that, but I was just pointing out that, but on the other hand, white people get to play whatever the fuck they want. Most of the parts are for them and they get to play whatever they want. So.
I remember, this wasn't true, but after Scarlett Johansson played the lead in Ghost in the Shell, they were talking about the live action Mulan. And there was a rumor going around that Scarlett Johansson was going to be cast as Mulan. And I looked it up later, and it's not a rumor. It was a joke people were making online. But by the time I heard it in person, I didn't read it online. When I heard it in person, I thought it was a rumor. And so I was like, I remember being so annoyed. I was like, we're in the 2010s here. And I was like, I remember saying to my classmate, I was like, there are literally more Chinese people on this planet than any other kind of person, and they can't find a Chinese person to play Mulan. Like, what? I'm not thrilled with the live action Mulan by no means, but at least they managed to pass that bar.
I have not seen either version of Mulan.
The animated one is good. I don't recommend the live action one. I mean, like, you can watch it just to see what it is, but I think the animated one is charming, even though Donny Osmond is the singing voice for Li Shang, but it's a good song. And also another thing that just makes the animation distinct from the live action is that the live action is like, oh, we're getting rid of the music and Mushu and stuff like that, so this is like a serious, realistic depiction of an accurate, authentic depiction of Chinese culture, and it's like, that's not what happened. not what they mean.
Yeah. Didn't they still just follow the basic plot of the cartoon?
Well, they added some stuff, and then they also did a thing where it's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard of them, but Shiron J. Zhou is a sci-fi author. Their main book is Iron Widow. But they're known kind of online as a content creator, and they started a YouTube channel specifically after having watched Mulan 2020. And
Okay.
the opening of that first video is, have you ever seen a movie that made you so mad you had to go and make an entire YouTube channel just to talk about how bad it was? And so they just sit there and talk about like the cultural inaccuracies of Mulan 2020. Things like, like this is supposed to be. Oh, so Mulan is like I don't know if I might be mixing up North and South, but we'll just go with it. Mulan is a northern Chinese story, but this housing that they're living in is a distinctly southern Chinese housing, and it's like, but they picked it because it's pretty, and they are pretty.
Sure.
And if they had just picked it because it was pretty, maybe I wouldn't be harping on them. But the fact that they're like, this is the authentic, like that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Don't claim you're being super authentic if you're not going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, don't get me started on Braveheart, but we've been going on for quite a while now.
Yeah.
This is going to be a long episode, so I think this is a good time to wrap it up. But there's a lot for you folks to think about. And thank you so much for joining me, Brianna. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes. Sorry, I was long-winded on this one. I have lots to think
No,
about.
that's
Yeah.
why I wanted you to come on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what the next episode will be or when it'll be or who will be here. We'll probably have Bree back. But if you have any Young Splain topics you want to pitch at us, send us a message.
Unfortunately, I'm not that cultured, so sometimes we get a Young Splain topic, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about that. I can't explain it to you. But I try.
You can just go to the page for our other podcast, mmftg.com, to send a message. There is a pod page for this one, but I think it's podpage.com/oldsplainyoungsplain. You can send a message there. But thanks for listening, everybody. I think I have a topic for next time, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. It'll be a surprise.
Watch American Born Chinese on Disney Plus. It's a good show.
There you go.
Or don't watch it on Disney Plus, but consume it some other way. It's a good show.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'll have to go watch it now. Thanks for joining me, Brianna, and come back next time for Old Splain, Young Splain. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Old Splain, Young Splain with Precious D. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on your podcasting platform of choice.